Hey everybody, Pastor Will. Now, we are in week 4 of Everyday Church, our Bible study focused on First Peter. I know most of you all aren't watching this to the end because you may not realize it, but we can see the metrics of watch time. And we know that videos over 10, 15 minutes have a dramatic reduction of engagement. So I want to encourage you to stay through to the end on this one. Let me know that you can power through. And then my promise to you is I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet. Our homework for last week was to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And in order to make sure I keep this tight, I'm not going to work through this verse by verse, but instead I'm going to attach the follow along guide so that way you can go through this yourself. But I want to highlight a couple of key things that really stood out to me that I think really shapes what Peter's doing. All right, and then I want to give you a few questions for you to consider practically as we think about what it means to be the everyday church. So the first thing I want to do is skip verses 1 through 3. We're going to get back to those in a minute. And I just want to let you know that when Peter starts talking about all this language as Jesus as the cornerstone, that the builders rejected, that some will stumble because they disobey the word, here's the background of that. So Peter has in mind, and he's quoting this book Isaiah to tell this, that there is an understanding that when God returns, when God's Messiah returns, that God himself is going to build the new temple. So the first temple was destroyed when they went into exile in Babylon, when the Jewish people went to exile, and they built a temple when they returned. But it's clear in scriptures that they're disappointed, they're sad, because it is nowhere near as beautiful as the temple, nowhere as near as beautiful as the temple that Solomon had built was. Okay, so this idea is that Isaiah lays out to these exiled people that God will come and return, and he, with his own hands, will build the new temple. And he will do so with a cornerstone, which is like the foundation block of this temple that the other builders would have rejected. And up to this point, most of the Israelites would have seen that rejected cornerstone as themselves. They had been in exile. They had been cast out and punished. They were the stone the builder had rejected, but was now going to use this stone, Jerusalem, the Israelites, to build a new temple. But Peter and most of these first century Christians would have understood that when they read Isaiah, the stone that would build the new temple is Jesus. Jesus is that stone. And then Peter goes on to say, and you are the building blocks that build up this new temple. So this is very important to understand in the context of this passage that Peter is saying, you are now God's new temple. So he said, you're God's chosen people, right? He says you're God's exiled people in the first chapter, setting up that they are in this exodus and this post-exile narrative. But now he goes further and says, you were also the temple that was promised. And so when God returns, it is in this temple, in the midst of his people, that he's going to dwell. So, if you're going to be the temple of God, well, then what does that look like? Well, he makes it clear in verses 1 through 3. 1, stop doing the things that you did before. So, this is super important. Put away, in other words, get rid of malice, slander, stop lying about each other, stop being envious of each other, stop being hypocrites, stop deceiving each other. Like he says, you can't be the temple of God and still do things the way you did before. So don't forget, he's writing to a primarily Gentile group. They have come to know Jesus as the Messiah, and he's having to teach them what that means. And he says, listen, like a newborn baby, you need to crave what's going to make you grow, long for that spiritual milk. He says, you guys are new to this, but you've got to make sure you stay focused on what matters, and that's Jesus. And that's when he lays out, come to Jesus, the living stone that's going to help be the foundation upon which you're built. So, Peter has used that first half of this to say, hey, you are not only God's chosen people, but you are the very temple of God. And then in verse 9, he goes and he kind of recounts it. Chosen race, a royal priesthood, holy nation, a people of his own possession. These are all descriptors for Israel. And so he's hammering home, like, you are Israel now. Don't forget that. Like, you are in these different communities. There isn't a centralized place. You don't have to go back to Jerusalem. This is now something totally new, but it's not. It's something very old. You are now God's chosen people through Jesus Christ. And then he reinforces that language about being a sojourner and an exile. He says, you guys are in a strange place. When he says sojourners and exiles, the thing I really want to just share with you is Peter's not saying like you're exiles and one day we'll all get to escape this terrible earth. No, because the promise that he keeps saying is be hopeful that Jesus is going to return. And he hammers that home again at the end of this little section. He says, just keep your hope in this, that the king and the kingdom where your citizenship really lies, it's on the way. But until it's here, you guys are like travelers in a new land. Well, what are you going to do as travelers in a new land? And he says, act honorably. Very much like the exiled people in Jeremiah, specifically Jeremiah 29, which I'm going to include. I want you to read that passage in Jeremiah 29 and say, what did it mean to live in exile in Babylon? Which I think Peter's hinting back at as well. He's saying, live amongst these people that you were once a part of honorably. Keep your conduct honorable, not just amongst each other, but also amongst these neighbors that don't share in this good news. And he says, don't do the thing. It's that same thing. Don't be like you used to be. Those passions, those desires, those things that you thought were okay, like now you know they're not. And if you go back to that way of living, you're no better than they are, and you cannot proclaim God's goodness to your community. And this really is the part where Peter is shifting the focus of being the everyday church away from being the church to each other, but now the church out to the community at large. And so he says, keep your conduct amongst the Gentiles honorable. Why? He says, because they're going to slander you. He says, but when God returns, they will have seen your conduct and know, like, oh, I have to glorify God because they got it. It's like you are being he's saying to them, like, you are the ones that are prepping them for God's return. So don't screw it up. All right. So again, we're right under 10 minutes right now. Here's what I want to leave with you. If you've made it this far, amen, thank you. We are obviously living in a rapidly shifting culture. And the big thing that I would say I've noticed is that we can no longer operate as if the church and Christianity is the assumed backdrop. We now have a lot more in common with the churches that Peter's talking to because we no longer have this privileged place in culture that we did even 20 years ago. And that may not be a bad thing because in a lot of ways, I would say the church did not keep its conduct amongst non-believers honorable. If you check the news, there's a lot of reasons why people would look at the church with suspicion. There are a lot of instances of slander and malice and deceit and envy. So my question for you is this: if we are to be the everyday church the way Peter's describing it, where we're not focused on just the church being the automatically assumed backdrop, then what does it look like for you in your community right now to have honorable conduct amongst non-believers? And in order to answer that question better, I want to say when I say honorable, I mean conduct that not only honors God, but honors your neighbor. One that helps build them up and one that helps make them feel like there is something going on in this community that would cause them to glorify God. All right, so all that being said, I think we're right at 10 minutes. I want to try to keep it that way for you guys. But if you have made it this far, here's what I want you to do. Show me that you have by just shooting me an email. If you haven't answered that question on like what it would look like to, I don't know, be that kind of honorable conduct that's going on, yeah, just do that. Show me that you're engaging with the text, and I want to hear your questions too. So you can email me at will@hopeatneeded.org. Heck, you could call me or text me, 863-409-8491, and I would love to just see like what you're doing right now as you read through this and what God is showing you in this passage as well. All that being said, grace, peace, blessings, and I will catch you soon.